Well, good evening, New Perspective. Good to be here. Just start by saying that big changes are coming. Good things, good things. So praise God for that. Today I'm going to keep it very brief. We're going to talk about the Sabbath, but for those of you that have heard about the Sabbath, don't tune out, because if you know me, I usually take a completely different angle, and it's not because I'm trying to be different, but there's things that I see that I think that need to be shared. So today, for example, I'm barely going to touch on Exodus 20, which is where the commandment is given to keep the Sabbath. I'm actually going to focus on other things, and including I'm going to bring in the verse that's used at weddings, which is about a man shall leave and cleave to his wife. So let's get right into it then. What is the Sabbath? It's a day of rest, right? That's all it is. It's a day of rest. I think people make a lot out of it. Time to spend with friends, family, with God, and that's all it is. Not to do any work or think about work or try to work. And you know, it's funny because I think of our society today, and how many of us go on a vacation, and then when it's the last day and as we're coming back, we're all depressed because we're going to go back to the daily routine and school or work or whatever. But when you think about it, this is the one day where God tells you to forget about work, forget about everything that burdens your soul, and just rest. Just relax, unwind. Be with Him, be with friends, be with family, do things that you like to do that are restful to your soul. I mean, we paid to go on vacations to do something like this, and here's God saying, look, you get to do this every week for one day. Not necessarily going away, but it's the same principle of resting and being away from work. And I was thinking about it, how a lot of us think that God is a mean God. And when I say a lot of us, I mean those of us that think sometimes maybe that God, He's always up there with all these rules and all these things. And of course, in this church we don't believe that at all, and we talk against that. But the world thinks of God as a mean God, and yet He's the one that's saying, look, rest. The 7-day week comes from creation. I'm sorry, I don't care what anybody says. That's where it's, where it's rooted. Whether or not the world wants to admit it, it doesn't matter, but it's the truth. So the Genesis creation. And as I was studying to get prepared for this, I was thinking, you know what? Everyone always argues about whether or not keeping the Sabbath is legalistic. But do you realize, and this just blew me away, as I was preparing for today, last week, it blew me away when I realized that God actually established the Sabbath right after creation. I mean, I'm talking that's thousands of years before He gave the commandment. And I thought, well, wait a minute. The Sabbath is right there. Genesis 2, verse 2, it says, by the seventh day God completed His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it He rested from all His work which God had created and made. I mean, there it is. Genesis 2, the Sabbath. And I thought, so why are we always arguing about keeping the Sabbath from a legalistic point of view, an Exodus 20 point of view? Yes, He eventually gave the commandment. But you know what? He started the Sabbath way back right after creation. Isn't that interesting? And I thought, I don't know, to me, for those of you that know me, I'm kind of a workaholic. And it's always been difficult for me to rest. But when I realized that God created the Sabbath right after creation, He instituted the Sabbath, He made it, He rested, to me it just shuts down all the arguments against the Sabbath. Now some of you might be there thinking, well, okay, Martin, hold on. So God rested, and that's fine. But what has that got to do with us? God does a lot of things that we don't do. Okay, but two things. Number one, does God need to rest? No. Does God get tired? Does God need to sleep? No. A lot of the times in the Bible, what God does is not because He needs it, it's because it's good for us. For example, does God need our worship? We talk about this all the time. Is He going to stop being God because we don't worship Him? If every person on earth alive today denies God and stops worshiping Him, does God stop being God? No. And no. Right? He doesn't. So does He need our worship? No, yes, he wants to be worshipped. And I believe, again, it's because it's good for us. It's good for man to worship the true God. And so it's the same thing with the Sabbath. Does he need to rest? Well, no, we know that. So why did he put that in here? It's because it's good for us. And so right there and then there's, I think to me, it's the greatest argument. God created this as an example for us to do, and that is good enough for me. If he thinks we should do it, then I should do it. And remember, I'm not even talking about Exodus 20 yet. I'm barely going to touch on it. So that's one reason then, for those of you that might say, well, that's for God. No, it's not. It's for us, because God doesn't get tired. I mean, it's obvious. But then here's the second thing that I noticed. Exodus 16:22. Now on the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, manna, 2 omers for each one. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, then he goes on. He says, then he said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is the Sabbath, observance of a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning. Verse 29 in Exodus 16. See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you bread for 2 days. On the 6th day, remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So this is, of course, when God provided the Sabbath for the children of Israel. He says very clearly, you're only to pick up enough bread for the day. Do not pick up any more. With one exception. On the 6th day, they were supposed to pick up bread for 2 days because of the rest. Now, keep in mind, this is Exodus 16. The commandment was not given until Mount Sinai in Exodus 20. They were not there yet. That had not happened. But yet here we find that before the law is given formally, the children of Israel are already keeping the Sabbath. That blew me away. I'm like, whoa, how did I miss this? I always assumed when I read this that the Sabbath, the commandment, had formally been given, and it had not. So then, today, when I hear a lot of arguments all the time about the Sabbath and whether it is legalistic or not to try to keep the Sabbath, it's like, it's not. The law had not even been given, and they were already keeping it. Number one. Number two, God instituted the Sabbath really right after creation. Thousands of years before the Jews and the Israelites and the law and all that. So I don't know about you, but to me it's like, okay, then you know what? That's good enough argument for me. I don't even need Exodus 20, which is where he formally gives a commandment. And I hope that you that are listening to me today, then will consider this, that you know what, if you think it's legalistic, well, again, consider God created the Sabbath right after creation. And the children of Israel kept the Sabbath before it was even given as a commandment. And so to me, again, like I was saying, Genesis 2:24, it says, for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. What does this got to do with the Sabbath? Well, as far as I'm concerned, everything, because in principle, no one's doing away with Genesis 2:24. This was also not part of the law, right? God institutes marriage, a man and a woman. And, I mean, nobody fights that, right? But yet we fight the Sabbath when it was actually done right after creation and even before Genesis 2:24. So to me that says, you know what, this is a solid argument that we need to keep the Sabbath. And really with that I'm done. I could just go and sit down. What else do we need to say? But let's continue. So Exodus 20, I will read it. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So finally, after who knows how long after creation, then finally God makes it a law and makes it official. But again, this is after the children of Israel were already keeping the Sabbath, and God himself gave us the example when he rested on the 7th day. So again, I'm And I have to tell you, I'm a little embarrassed talking about the Sabbath because I've always been, I still am kind of a workaholic. But I got to tell you what, as I get older, there's things that I can't do anymore that I used to be able to. And I'm kind of forced to rest, really, only because of age and because there's certain things that I can't do quite as easily. And so why don't we keep the Sabbath? Honestly, I think the main reason is, like in many things, we just don't trust God. We do not believe He's going to provide. Okay? So I think it's lack of faith, to be honest. And now I just want to say, for those of you that have been following us, we're not about putting guilt trips on people. That's just, I hate that. I'm not about manipulating people, putting guilt trips or anything like that. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to manipulate or guilt anybody into keeping the Sabbath. I'm just sharing, of course we have to share the truth, and I believe that the truth is, at the core of it is that we do not trust God to provide for us. Okay? Last Monday I took a Sabbath. Tomorrow I'm planning on taking the Sabbath, and believe me, there's some things, as some of you know, in real estate, there's some people that I've talked to that I really want to contact tomorrow, but it's like, you know what, no, I'm going to wait till Tuesday. And really, if I do not wait until Tuesday and then take my Sabbath, and I don't have to do it tomorrow, but I'm choosing tomorrow. But let's face it, and tomorrow I'll talk to other people, right? And if I take Tuesday as a Sabbath, well, I will want to follow up with those people that I talked to on Monday. And I will not want to take my Sabbath on Tuesday. I want to put it up to Wednesday, so I will never do it. But I've come to learn, you know what? God is my provider. And if I really trust God, I'm going to take the Sabbath off. And guess what? Even, and I thought about this, I mean, what if somebody calls when I'm taking a Sabbath and they want to list their house that day, and they're looking for an agent that day? That does happen, by the way. And because I'm taking my Sabbath, guess what? I'm not going to get that listing. Well, so the question is, do you trust God that He's going to provide for you, even though you may lose listings or money because of the Sabbath? I think ultimately, again, that's why we don't keep the Sabbath, because we do not believe God. I think a lot of things that we do happen, or we do because of unbelief. I mean, I hate to say that. And again, it's not to bring a guilt trip to anybody, but I think it should encourage us to, you know what, hey, let's review what we do and let's act out of faith. In the times that I've done that very thing, I'm thinking, okay, if I do not believe in God, I'm going to do this thing. But if I really believe God, then I'm going to do this other thing. And it was clear. It was like a fork in the road. And I chose, you know what, I'm going to believe God. And boy, the results really were outstanding. Maybe not necessarily the timing that I wanted, but they were great anyway. So, I also want to say, if you that are listening, if you never keep the Sabbath, guess what? God still loves you. That does not change anything. God loves you. He will bless you. He wants the best for you. But let's face it, we do reap the consequences of the options that we make, or the decisions that we make. And if we choose not to keep the Sabbath, we will reap those consequences. In fact, let's talk about that for a minute. I remember when I was, oh my gosh, in my early 20s, probably still within less than 5 years of having been married to my wonderful wife, I was working as a computer programmer, and I was a contractor. In other words, I was allowed to work from home. Of course, the danger of that is that, well, then you can work forever without ever stopping. And that's what I did. And I worked and I worked and I worked 7 days a week. And one day, my arms started to hurt from typing in the computer for hours on end without rest. And I remember that I was shocked. Of course, we were in the ministry at that time too. I'm thinking, God, I'm doing your ministry. I'm being a father. I'm being a good steward. I thought, I'm trying to work, and now I'm going to have this pain. And I was thinking about the Sabbath. You know, you do not keep the Sabbath. My wife reminded me, so did my mother-in-law. And I'm actually glad about that.